Well, it's now 6 p.m. on March 24th, and we will be calling the meeting to order. And I would like to ask everybody to stand for the pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And I'd like to have a motion for the approval of the agenda.
I'll move that.
Okay, Nick, second.
Support.
Barb and John tied, so we'll go with Barb since she's the vice president. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Next time it'll be you, John.
Thank you.
And
If
then we
everybody
don't
could
have
turn
any-
on their mics, it doesn't look like everybody's got their mics on.
We do not have any visitors to recognize, so we will go past there right into the discussion items, and Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to give an update. We talked a little bit about our fine arts program at our last board meeting. We had updates from several different components of fine arts. Now we have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the marching band program. As you recall, sixth grade music was a requirement for kids. Going into music in sixth grade was a requirement. Those current students are in seventh grade. They're now registering for music in eighth grade. Roughly 70 to 75% of our students are moving on into our fine arts program between band, orchestra, and choir. And that will greatly impact our marching band program also, which has other implications. I'm gonna tell you this, choir is the cheapest one to have all the kids be in. But they all wanna do orchestra, they wanna do band, and we're excited because now, as the kids enter high school, we have the marching band program we are requiring students that are in band to be in marching band as freshmen and sophomores and as they continue on. So we're seeing an increase in our volume of students. Having said that, I have Mr. Vanderwall here behind you because I want to make sure these numbers are fairly accurate. We have one of the largest freshman class signed up for marching band next fall, roughly 30 plus students. However, we do graduate a large class of seniors. So we know our band's gonna be about the same size probably, but the following year is when all the sixth, seventh, and eighth graders will then start their high school. And that's when the numbers we think will substantially start to increase. Part of the challenge is when you have a program like marching band, it's not just about instruments, it's also about performances. So I'd like to present an opportunity for the board to maybe consider, which I'd like to bring back to the next board meeting, is to get uniforms for our marching band. They're about 13 years old, and they're falling apart based on people that are actively involved with repairing our band uniforms. So met with Mr. Vanderwall. We have an opportunity to look at a uniform that we spent time going back and forth through a company. We did get another bid from another company. I presented that to the board. We also had 3 other vendors that we looked at. Some would bid, some couldn't come close. You saw that information. So we've met our threshold to required bid. So at our next board meeting, I'd like to present an opportunity to purchase band uniforms. We do have a sample of the band uniform, if Abigail can come in. So Mr. Vanderwall does not know that we commandeered this uniform. So this took some, the board knows this, I let you know about trying to let Mr. Vanderwall, so I lured him into being here tonight so he could see this. He's convinced that uniform went back to the company, which it did, but then I also commandeered the uniform and got it back here, along with a bid, another bid. So we are very excited to share this with the board. What questions you may have. I am gonna ask Mr. Vanderwall, when I told you you didn't have to prepare anything.
Yeah.
It's a little bit inaccurate,
Okay.
because the uniqueness about this uniform is you can have a show uniform, which would be something you would maybe see in a parade, or maybe on a Friday night football game, but then there's what's part of it is a performance part of the uniform, which could be an annual, I'm not gonna say t-shirt, because that's gonna mess it up, but there's other,
So she's got something underneath that looks like, it's just a, what would you call it, Craig?
They call it a performance shirt.
Performance shirt.
Yeah.
It's just a
Performance top.
performance top,
Yeah.
yep, and you can change this out every year. Jennison UC will do that same thing, they'll change it out to match their show every year, and then they'll just keep the same bibbers underneath the pants. And
the only thing we're
it's
missing is a hat, which
the
is called a
Shako.
Shako,
Yep.
sorry.
And so this would be the wrap that we would put around the Shako, and you would be able to.
Yeah,
But it looks, I mean, it looks sharp. She said, Abigail said that feels really comfortable. I can vouch for it. I tried it on too, and it's very comfortable. It's easy to move in. It looks so sharp. It looks, she said, it looks so modern. And it really does. I talked to Mike at FJM, and he's like, everybody's wearing this look right now. Everybody's in this right now. So it's current, it's modern, it's fresh, it's our school colors. We've looked at a lot of different patterns. We looked at a lot of different options, and they, we told them what we liked, and they worked with us really well, I think, and they gave us this in the end. We did go back and forth a couple different times, but in the end, this is what we got.
Craig, you wanna add anything? I know you spent a lot of time and did not know this night was
No, I'm
coming.
blown away. I've got goosebumps. This is the greatest thing. I think the thing for me is that we have so many kids where this is like, just means so much to them, and this is gonna be a massive source of happiness for them, absolutely. I mean, they're gonna be so excited to see this and have that to wear, and, you always just wanna feel like you're kind of updated with the people that you see every weekend, and we love our current uniform. The same company made them, but they're 13 years old, and they are falling apart, and they are a dated kind of style, so we worked hard to try to find something or design something that wasn't gonna be so modern that it didn't connect with our audience, but something that, people would see and know that that's Hudsonville, and I think they got it right, so. I can just tell you on behalf of the students, that's what gets me the most excited, cause I think they're gonna just be so happy if this comes together. I can't even imagine. Right, Abigail, they'll be
Yeah.
excited, right? How did you feel? Were you pretty pumped?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was nervous when she got the call on Friday. Her mom got the call, mom's here, there.
Yes.
So, we talked on Friday, there was some nervousness, and then getting you here, and then, sorry, we just wanted.
No, just absolutely amazing. I mean, just amazing. It's such a good thing. It's such an awesome thing to do for the kids.
If you are not happy about being surprised, you can 100% blame it on me. But, just getting feedback from the board, I know this takes formal board approval in April. If the sense is tonight that the board, it would be nice to share it with the kids unless the board is like, hold on, we're not there yet. Working with Pat in the finance department, this is something, as well as additional instruments, as we know this program. So Craig's working on what that looks like when we see the numbers start to grow. They suggest you order roughly 20% more uniforms than you need because of sizing. We have to start getting the kids sized. We know based on timing, and this is also my fault, that it might be tight getting them by week 1, but maybe it'll be 85 degrees and they'll wear t-shirts the first game. But by the time we get into definitely the end of the season, or at least maybe anything that takes place, the Christmas parade or things like that, to have these uniforms for the kids. And it'd be nice to be able to show them, maybe even before spring break. If there's a seminar time, we have the uniform. As you clearly see, you did send it back, and I did do it.
Yeah. I love it.
So.
That was a good trick. Cause it broke my heart to send it back, so.
There was some frustration, and I understand that, but there's a process to this, and looking forward to getting this. We're looking at plenty of uniforms to get us through, we think, the next 3 to 5 years, and there is a guarantee that the same uniform can be replicated in 5 years. Once you get past 10 to 15, it's a little bit harder because of material, but if we start with a certain number now, which was in your board packet, that should get us through plenty of time. And then if we need to in 5 years, because our numbers are where they are, we can order 40, 50, 60, whatever that number is, and go from there.
Abigail, can we see the back, please?
Yeah.
Okay, do it now.
Oh, I like
So
that.
right now, we have, it's called, a gauntlet, or no, not a gauntlet, it's, what's it called? The little thing that hangs down.
Oh, the sash that hangs?
Yeah, this
It's on there.
But
board
this
packet.
is a removable, it's all
Oh,
removable.
cool.
Yeah, so you can pull off a different look with that if you wanted to do that. These gauntlets are also removable.
Wow.
Again, the shirt underneath, so this is just a one, just like a vest. So the sleeves, this is actually a colored undershirt. So this is a white one, just to show an example. It does look really sharp with the white underneath. But again, you could change it to any color, or just wear this with the pant, the
Will the drum major have a different uniform?
Yes, yeah, I haven't seen the drum major version yet, but
There's
it'll
a little
likely
bit
be
different to us.
darker in color, and it'll be a similar pattern to it, but definitely a different uniform, yeah.
It is called gauntlet, it says right on here, I don't know the word in front of it, but it says gauntlet.
It's awesome.
Excellent. This would be operating?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in listening to what Greg had to say, I've never heard that massive source of happiness before. But in looking around the board, I would say that, you could probably, tell the kids
Okay.
that we, will probably be on radio.
So you have to keep it secret until Mr. Vanderwall says.
Yeah.
It looks like we have somebody to try it on now.
What we're looking to do is request, the marching band kids for a seminar next week before we go on spring break. And they're really bugging me to know what our show is going to be next year. So I've been telling them, I'll tell you before spring break. And the hope, before I sent the uniform back, was to put someone in it and surprise them. And have them come walking out in their new uniform, but I sent it back. So this is just an awesome surprise.
We can
for
go
all
back
of us.
with that plan.
Yeah, so now we can go back to that plan. Tomorrow, we have frozen seminar at school because the kids have to prep for their testing, for the SAT testing. So next week, Tuesday, we would, do that during seminar, and then at the very end of our presentation, have somebody come walking out in uniform. I'm telling you, it's gonna
So board
excite a
members-
lot of kids.
Quiet.
Yeah, so we
Section
know
of board,
getting
quiet.
recorded
I always record
Yeah.
this, but it is what it is.
Yeah, we'll
For
get
the
some
number of people
cameras
that
and-
watch these recordings.
I really think we work hard to tell our students, just like our athletics said, when you put our band uniform on, you're representing your school, your community, you're representing the hours you put into practice, you're representing your family, so our uniform means an awful lot to us, and I can say that as an alum who wore a Hudsonville band uniform, so I know there are kids looking at it going, okay, ours are 12, 13 years old, it'd be just awesome if that dream, they're just gonna be so excited, and that's the best part of this, so, yeah, it's so neat. Yeah.
Any other questions for this request? I did wanna run through some of the numbers, so just to have a general idea, that was also important, that wasn't the only reason, but, I know there's a competition, there's a performance going on tonight at the high school, I know all of these people are heading back. You can leave that if you want in my office, and then I'll package it up and I'll get it to you, Mr. Vanderwall, so you have it. I'll send it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the PBIS data update, and Mandy, will you be taking it?
I will, yeah. You have a copy of our presentation in your board packet, and I know Dr. Mayer will pull it up on our screen in just a second. So with me tonight is the PBIS Administrator Committee, so I will ask them just to briefly share their name and what program they are. I'll be excited.
Okay, Melanie McClure, principal of the 560.
Pete Garland, principal at Jamestown Water.
Delia Bush, assistant principal at the high school.
Josh Mearsma, principal at Bauer.
Clint McDowell, the assistant principal at Baldwin Street.
So we were here last year around this time, and presented an update to you just around, an explanation of, what it looks like, kind of at the ground level of what implementation was at that time, as well as to address some questions that, came up around the SOAR 5 survey, and just asking us to talk about some differences between some perception data percentages and some teacher comments that were written in the feedback. And so we wanted to come back again this year just to share another update. I think it's really important to, and I'm very thankful that our administrators are here tonight just because they see this in action every day. This topic is not only part of our strategic plan, the goal number is referenced in the agenda, but it's also the second prong of the district's continuous improvement team goal. The first is academics, so multi-tiered systems of supports in academics. And PBIS is another acronym that essentially means the same thing as MTSSB, so multi-tiered systems of support in behavior. So when you hear those two acronyms, we're really talking about the same thing. So, this just starts off with the goal of positive behavior support is not perfect children, rather the goal should be creating a perfect environment for enhancing their growth. So this really speaks to what is the object of positive behavior interventions and supports. We're not looking for the elimination of error or behavior. We're really looking to say, is our system in our schools aligned to provide timely intervention and the appropriate level of support for each student where they're at. So when we go through this agenda, we'll speak to what this looks like in terms of monitoring outcomes, both at the district and the building level. So I'm gonna turn it over to Josh.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening. So as Mandy mentioned, about this time last year, we were asked to take a look. So building principals went back and had staff meetings to explore some of the perhaps misconceptions around PBIS and just take a temperature of where the staff was at. The packet that Clint passed out, the way you might read this is just common objections that you might hear about a positive behavior system. And working with the PBIS specialist in the building, Taylor Lindman, we decided to share these and then have feedback and discussion with our staff at a staff meeting, and then those results were shared back with Mandy. It was a beneficial discussion just to, again, take the temperature of the staff and where they were at. It gave us an opportunity to feel reinforced that we were on the right track. And as you read through here, there's quite a bit of information, so I'm not going to go verbatim. But again, these are just natural objections that you might hear as you're implementing a new behavior system. One of the big ones that I recall when I went through the training was around praise. You know, why are we bragging kids? And another one was around the difference between being positive and being negative. It's more being positive versus being corrective, because when you work with children, of course, there are times when you have to correct them. The concept being that when we're minding the positives and we're using, in our building, use tickets to mark positive behaviors, we're building up a bank account of sorts. So we're making deposits in those bank accounts with children, because we know that at certain points, we're gonna have to come back and have perhaps more difficult discussions and correct some behaviors. So that's really what this did. And again, that was a very beneficial practice for our buildings to engage in.
Thanks, Josh. At our district continuous improvement team meetings.
Could I ask one, sorry?
Please do.
Okay, so this that you just handed to us, Josh, is this from just your school? Or was this done throughout the elementaries, or?
I'm not exactly sure how other principals approached it.
Okay.
The objective was to gather feedback around PBIS.
Okay,
These prompts were actually taken from, when I was a teacher still, I was asked to lead this initiative in our district, Maple Valley Schools, when I was there. And these were from the training manual from the state of Michigan, just common objections to a PBIS implementation.
sure.
So that's what I chose to use, because they are common and they're very beneficial talking points and conversation starters.
And what was the timing of your get together with your staff?
It was during a staff meeting, is that?
Just recently, or?
So this was on the heels of last year's
Okay.
presentation, and then Mandy asked the principals to go to buildings
Okay.
and gather more feedback
Great,
to
okay.
drill down.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So each building may have approached the conversation with their staff in a different way, but the objective was to say, we have this percentage from a perception rating of feeling like you understand what this initiative is and you support it. And we also know that there's comments, anonymous, that, thank you, that express concerns or doubts or different beliefs, and that's fine. And we didn't want to necessarily try to call anyone out. We just thought, let's take a building-based approach to this, because the context of those conversations might sound different depending on how long their scope of implementation had occurred, or just team dynamics within each building. And so I know that we had the same period of time when all buildings were addressing it with staff, but they all took different approaches. So we have a measure that is used called the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, and this is a measure that is used across the nation to measure a school's implementation of a positive behavior intervention system framework. So remember, PBIS is not a packaged curriculum, it's not sort of like prescriptive, it's about building a system so that you can understand what percentage of your staff and student understand what you're trying to accomplish. What does SOAR stand for? You know, what should you do if you see this type of concern? What's your referral team? What's the makeup of your referral team? And so it's a measure of implementing the core pieces of PBIS. So at the district level, what we do is we compile the information building by building, and we look for each building to make growth goals based on what their score was and what are 2 key indicators that they believe they can approach next. If we were to set the standard each year to say, okay, every building in the district work on numbers 14, 15, we know that might not be the best fit because that's not where they are in their conversations. And so each building's PBIS team chooses which goal they want to work on that year. And over the course of our district continuous improvement team meetings in the year, we discuss how they're growing in these areas. They share the strategies that they're implementing to show growth in these areas. And then at the end of the year, we'll report out what goals were met. So this graph just kind of outlines there's 15 items. You can score 0, 1, or 2. So 30 is a perfect score. Once we reach about 90% fixed success or higher, we start to measure our growth in what's called a Tier 2 tiered fidelity inventory, which really looks at our intervention systems. So this is looking at our universal platform for building a PBIS framework. Does anybody have questions about this slide? Yeah.
The legend, the total points, is that based on the 15 items and how those are scored?
Yes.
Okay.
So the highest you can get is 30. Once you get above 27, but we've done what we can to implement. Now it's time to measure how effective we are at it.
Well, I think we always want to say in what ways is this shaping the school, but a good way to look at it is you're positioned in a good place to begin your intervention level system, because what research would say is that you can't intervene your way out of a Tier 1 problem, meaning if you don't have a good foundation for universal supports, you're not going to be as successful with the intervention attempts. It's sort of like if you're not in good health already, taking a intervention at the next level has more risks, right? So same concept here is we want to really have a solid base of Tier 1 before we start to measure our progress with Tier 2.
Your Tier 1, Mandy, just
Yes.
say what Tier 1 is.
Tier 1
One more time,
means
please.
universal practices. So what is impacting the whole school?
Gotcha. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mandy, what
Yes.
are you mentioned 15 questions.
Yes.
What are what, I mean, you have
Yeah,
an
yes.
example?
Items are, does the team have a protocol for making database decisions? Does the team have a communication loop from the decision-making team to all stakeholders? Does the team have a plan for annual training and review? Those types of
So these are all process
Yes.
questions.
Yes.
Okay.
And
These all
the
indicate.
Yes, yeah, these are indicators for how well is your base system set up.
Okay.
Okay, so then as we turn to Tier 2, our elementaries have had a little bit more time to make some movement towards this, and they had selected research-based interventions, and they had also made a decision-making rubric to determine which students would require a Tier 2 intervention. So Tier 2 intervention means that there's some indicator that the student has a greater level of need than the universal, right? And so the student has participated in the classroom-based lessons, the student has received acknowledgement systems from the teacher and surrounding adults, but there's either behavior referrals or teacher report that something's rising up to say this is a student that could use additional intervention. So at the elementary level, this year, one of our goals has continually been to expand the reach of those Tier 2 interventions so that we're not in a place to say, well, I would pick up this student for intervention, but I don't have capacity, right? So we want to increase our capacity or our reach. And so this year we have been able to serve over 200 students pre-K through 5 with a Tier 2 intervention. This is primarily happening with our PBIS specialist. So depending on what the area of need is, they align that then to a research-based intervention that is intended to meet that same goal. So if a student is looking to build self-monitoring skills. Let's say it's very difficult for them to have a good gauge of how often, how well am I doing with self-regulation and control, and how much input do I need from other people to tell me how I'm doing. Then they might be aligned to an intervention that gives them that feedback initially and slowly increases their level of awareness of what their behavior looks like. So we have currently over 400 students that have received Tier 2 intervention this year. 95% of those students are either responding or have exited. So of the 95%, 40% have already exited this year from the Tier 2 intervention, and the remaining 55 are progressing towards their goals, and the remaining 5% are either students that we have increased their level of intervention, or they've been referred to the building-based child study team, where it's really an individual child conversation about what else can we put into place to help the student be successful. Do you have any questions about this slide?
So just for the number of students over 400, that's a lot
Yes.
through PK through 5.
Yes.
Rather than they're getting help. Do we have a breakdown, I'm assuming then per school?
Yes.
And then do we look at it, the percentage in each school to make sure that we're putting the resources where they're most
Yes.
needed, or is it kind of even out?
I think we have very similar percentages of success across the buildings. Yes.
Is this data going to impact where we put our MTSS and PBIS folks going forward?
No, similar to what Mia just mentioned about the data is pretty consistent within the buildings. The supports that we put in place based on the reorganization should cover all the buildings in the areas. But there's always gonna be a need. It's like all hands on deck when there's an area of focus, whether it's through coaches or through anybody from a district level standpoint to support where there's no ties.
Okay, how subjective and or objective are the criteria moving someone from Tier 1 to Tier 2? I mean, is it different in Bauer than it is in Georgetown, or is it very specific?
Yeah, the referral process is the same. Some of that is looking at the number of behavioral referrals that might indicate to us that there's an underlying need. But when it comes to needs that are more internalized, so it's not that the student's behavior is causing a disruption, but there's some other element of the student's profile that tells us they need additional support, they might be referred by teacher referral. So the process for referral is the same across buildings. I would also add that because this is a need, this has continued to be under the job description of student support specialist, which will continue in our elementary levels.
So if we have, and I appreciate all your answers, they're very helpful. If we have kids who have been diagnosed, let's say as being autistic, are they included in these numbers here? Because, you know, some kids are more naturally, because of their condition, are going to fall into different behavior patterns.
Sure. So, well, first I would say a student's disability status does not preclude them from being involved in a Tier 2 intervention. Some students have the diagnosis of autism but don't require special education programs and supports. Some students that receive a high level of special education support may require a more individualized plan for their behavior or social emotional growth that is provided through special ed programming. It wouldn't be reflected in these numbers.
Okay.
I seem to recall before, like you had I think it was like a pyramid, and
Yeah.
certain percentage we want in Tier 2 and Tier 3, just kind of as a goal.
Yes.
Can you refresh me on what
Yes.
our goals are for that?
So 80, 15, 5.
Okay. I was gonna guess that.
Awesome. Good
Well,
guess.
wouldn't Tier 1 be like 100, right? Cause that's everybody?
Yeah, so.
That's where I thought you might trip me up.
Ooh,
So,
yes.
it's either
Well,
80
if
or
we're
100 would be
thinking
my
there's
guess.
100 people in the triangle, we can't.
Can't have more than 100% of your people.
I know, that's
But-
why I was gonna
You
go
know, 80,
80.
15
Yes.
people.
Yes. But what we like to say is we don't put kids in a tier, we put a need in a tier. So what that means is if a student has a need for a Tier 2 intervention, they should, and in practice, receive both Tier 1 and Tier 2, right? And just because you might have a Tier 2 need in social emotional behavior doesn't mean that same need's gonna show up academically or in other areas, right? So in our systems of support, it should always layer upon each other. So even our students with the highest level of support, we still want them to be part of those underlying systems so that we're not just creating different systems, right? That siloed systems, these to be integrated, yeah.
So, we've got roughly 400 PK through 5, what's our total student count roughly? 5-ish, 5,000?
No, 39, no, 20.
Well, 22,000 at the high school, and,
Between, we had 7,000 total.
yeah, so minus 2,000 at the high school, so that's 5. I forgot middle school, I looked at middle school, my bad.
We skew that a little bit because we have 6th graders in this number.
Okay. I was just, yeah.
Basically, the
So
point I
we
was making,
do
I
have
feel like it's,
some in there.
if we're at 400-ish, that's right in line with what we should want, right?
Can't do
We're sitting-
math, but I think that's
Well,
true.
if you had
Yeah.
363, yeah, 3,600, you'd be right at that number, right around there.
Right, so then that was kind of a district overview, now we're gonna move more into the building level, and I'm gonna turn it over to Bill. Or Pete, or
I think
Delia.
Delia.
Delia, I'm turning over to Delia.
Turn it over.
So one of our goals of our PBIS teams within the buildings, and I'm speaking specifically of the high school because that's my involvement in it, is taking into account systems, practices, and data. So I am gonna try and bring all of those together for you in one happy little package. So go ahead and keep flipping. Thank you. So one of the things that we do in our team at the high school is we do look at suspension data because that is kind of one of our biggest pieces of information that we have, and we look to see how does our suspension data compare from past years to current years. Are there any things that are all of a sudden spiking that we need to be aware of? And then from there, we have some systems in place where, well, if we notice that there's a big jump in, and I'll talk about one of them here in a second, cheating and plagiarism, for example, that's something that we'll then tackle as a team, and how can we address this in a building-wide, more tier 1 level. Okay, so we looked at all of the suspension categories at the high school, and the really positive thing is all the categories except for one have gone down in the past several years. So that's a really good positive thing. The only one that did not go down is cheating and plagiarism. That one has gone up, which is why we have tackled that in a couple of our different lessons that we've done as a whole building. But I'm also gonna talk to you about kind of where we land as a PBIS team with some of the consequences as well, because the reality is, even though it is PBIS, there are still consequences for behaviors. And so I'm gonna tackle some of that too. There's another couple categories that we keep our eye on because they look like they're pretty even. Fighting and electronic devices, which is weird to think of how those go together, but if people are suspended for electronic devices, it's because they're recording other people without the permission, like if they get in a fight and then posting it. And that's where the suspension, so they do kind of dovetail even though they seem weird to go together. That's actually really on track with where we're at last year, so it's not any higher or any lower, but it's definitely something we're keeping an eye on. Go ahead and go to the next one. So I chose to focus on plagiarism and cheating since that is the one and only high school level 1 that has increased in the past couple of years. With AI, it is just easier, unfortunately. So we're trying to figure out how can we educate our students on, a lot of times they don't realize what they're doing is cheating. To be quite honest, when you have a conversation that they just don't realize that they shouldn't have done what they did. So there's some education that comes with it. So there are some academic consequences, and those vary depending on the department. The departments are consistent, but they're not necessarily all exactly the same department. Behavioral consequences, we're trying really hard to be consistent on our end. So we have a whole, we have this for all behaviors, what a typical consequence will look like if a student cheats, if a student gets in a fight, if a student does this, so that we can follow the same path every single time and be consistent. As far as for this specific example of cheating, it kind of depends on the level of cheating. If they copied someone else's homework assignment, that is a lot different than if they cheat on an exam. So the behavior consequence varies dependent on that as well. Sometimes it warrants a day in school, a day or more, depending on the situation. So when they go into our in-school suspension room, which is what we used our PBIS funding for, is our in-school suspension room. You can go to the next one. We will try to educate the students on what they were doing and having them reflect on things. So this is just an example, and I know it's really small, I tried to blow it up as much as possible. But this is something that students who, typical first offense, when they're in school, they are doing a reflection on what does it mean to have academic integrity? What might this, how might this mess up your career in the future? I've had students who are upperclassmen and looking at colleges, research what is the college that you want to get into, what is their policy on cheating and plagiarism. So trying to really make it relevant to them so that they're like, oh, I mean, the whole point is educating them so that they don't make the same mistake again.
Delia, you had mentioned that some of these kids don't seem to understand what they've done wrong. Give me an example of that.
Typical example, oh boy, let's see. Asking Google a question and copying and pasting it. That would be a typical, like, I didn't know I couldn't do that. Like, yeah, no, you can't necessarily do that. Or just like, well, he had his paper out. Why can't we, like, we're talking about it. We're studying together. Why can't I just copy everything down that they wrote if we were talking about it? So there's some education that has to go with that.
On the previous slide, you have suspension in school and then suspension out of school. I'm assuming we haven't had any suspensions out of school since there's no knowledge.
Yeah, plagiarism or cheating isn't one we normally would do an out of school suspension for. We wanna try and utilize our in school as much as possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I know you talked about AI, so AI is here to stay. Are we doing a lot in regards to education, how to use AI responsibly?
We're trying to.
And even like assignments, like show me all your prompts that you've used to get to this.
So we, Mike Anderson happens to be here as well, who helps a lot with some of the English department investigation. That was just a coincidence, Mike.
That would be a big area that we would have issues
I
in.
can say that we just so Thursday, we had a staff meeting, and I'm very intrigued and invested in AI, and we did a whole study on risk, and teachers walked away creating their own lessons. I think part of the challenge is the education of the adults at pace or beyond students.
Yes.
It's, unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, cause,
it's constantly
students are ahead
evolving.
of us, and we're trying to get, even like at Grand Valley, trying to get all our policies in place, and how do you use AI responsibly? So that you are not doing where you're doing plagiarism.
And I think some of the incidents that she's addressing talk about academic integrity and original thinking. So I know that, it's a tough field right now to keep, lots of demands on teachers, and then to learn new, high-tech platforms. It's a big ask.
I'll turn it over to Clint. You can tackle middle school.
Can I ask one more, I didn't know you were done, sorry. A question, when you had talked about the fact that there were, in all but cheating and plagiarism, the categories, the suspensions have decreased. So I'm not sure if I would explain this right, but is there a specific policy as to when someone would be referred for a suspension? In other words, is the method of deciding whether someone is going to get a suspension for something, is that a written guideline, or how does that work at the high school?
Right now, at least at the high school, we have a whole spreadsheet of different potential
Misbehaviors?
It's a great way to
Code
say
of
it.
conduct that you've seen it,
Yes.
if you do this, you get this, but there's a range, because, and there's also a range when it comes to the 7 factors that are included in every discipline that takes place, so.
And these are teacher or principal reported incidences, basically then?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a behavior matrix.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so at the middle school level, looking at the numbers in Power School, this is comparative data over the past, basically including this year would be a 3-year window of time. So that's what we're looking at when we see it here listed. And then nearly all categories have decreased in incidences. So, and I just listed them physical aggression, classroom disrespect, being disrespectful, and you can go through all those. All incidences are down comparatively from the previous 2 school years. And so, at least for this snapshot, right, because our kids change, because we get a different set of kids. It's not, we don't get the same kids all the way through, and we can compare apples to apples as they matriculate up to graduation. But this is the snapshot of 6th through 8th grade. And so this is our current numbers, so things are on the down tick, but that sounds bad, so we're gonna say they're on the uptick, because that's positive, as far as behavior goes. There was a slight increase in the numbers compared to previous years in e-cig or vape incidences and plagiarism. Our plagiarism is up not nearly as significant as what the high school is. I think our kids are still trying to figure out how to use AI, or what it is, or where it is. We see it mostly in ELA classes where kids are writing and or prompting to get rights, and then just copying and pasting versus using it as a tool, as a starter or a brainstorm, and then how do I take that tool and use it. I think we're probably in the same place. I don't know how many years ago calculators came into being, but we're probably in like that same place. AI is this tool, is this instrument, where if you ask some people, they say, it'll tell you it's the devil, and other people say, what a fantastic thing that we have in front of us that we can teach our kids to use to unlock their potential, right? So again, I think we're just in that place, and Barb, to your point, like we're like skiing down the mountain with in front of an avalanche. Like we're trying to keep up so we don't get mowed over by it, right? And it's difficult for our adults to stay on top of this ever-evolving piece. When we already know how we teach and how we teach best, and now we have this curveball thrown at us, all right, how do we incorporate this, because it's here. You're right, it's not going away. So, work in progress. The vape e-cig, potentially an issue, I don't know. The numbers are up slightly. We're similar to where we were across the district 2 years ago to this year. I talked to RMS. Their numbers are a little bit more higher than ours, and when I talked to them, it's more of a couple repeat incidences where perhaps students are already addicted to nicotine, and that is the drive. There's a lot of education then that goes into that when we're looking at discipline or how we're managing that and looking at those numbers. So there is a program that our nurses have set up and created that we have access to, that we will then, if a student, a first offense with a vape, then part of that consequence is going to be probably an out-of-school suspension, and then we have them return to an in-school suspension with an education piece about what that does, the nicotine addiction and the consequences of that. And so for us at BMS, that's been pretty productive, but it's difficult when kids are exposed to all these other things outside of our walls, and then have that they have to have come back in. Yeah.
Did you share it was a little bit higher at Rodney?
Currently.
Does that take into account the 5-6 building? Are we calculating the 6th graders? Of the
I had the 6th graders into this
account?
here, so we have their 6, 7, 8 on the south end of the district, and then our 6, 7, 8 on the north side.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Yep.
So, Clint, I mean, is these categories have decreased compared to the last 2 years? Is just this from September to a certain time this year?
So, right, yeah, fair question, right? So we have about a quarter of our school year left, right? And so where our numbers are at currently are below or on projection to be lower or the same as our higher mark.
Are there any times of the year that are more conducive to bad behavior than others?
Right now. Yeah, March is.
Like today, and it's all downhill from here?
Yeah, traditionally, these are the dog days of the year, right? They're the toughest times. I think they're tough for our adults and they're the toughest for our kids as well. We start to get some of these early days where we start to think spring, we start to get excited, and then we're hit over the head with, these days, they're still dark. It's a long stretch between Christmas and spring break. And traditionally, people get tired, and our kids are tired, and it is where we're at. We get, for us at BMS, it's half our students are thinking about, I'm over this place. I'm an 8th grader, I'm done. High school, senioritis really kicks in hard this time of year. And these are the trends that we see year after year after year. It is what it is to be a human. These are the tough days.
How can we attribute, or can we attribute any of this change in behavior, improvement in behavior, to MTSS and PBIS? Do we have anything that would link those, or?
So I think it would be correlational, right,
Right.
instead of causational. I think we can look at the start time of the implementation of our teams, and we would like to infer that it has made some impact on those numbers. I think it's also just about intentional timing of pre-teaching too. So I think as our teams get more and more fluid with identifying where our current behavior trends and how do we respond in the building, that's their constant question. So I think when we have a well-running system, like our TFI numbers, we know that those conversations can happen in a timely manner.
How would, okay, so I'm looking at these questions here in the questions that you would answer to your staff, okay, and they have to do with behavioral issues, okay, so is these numbers, are they taken back to the staff, to the teachers and stuff, and saying, okay, listen, we're seeing, and you have some teachers who would look at you and say, what are you talking about? I mean, it feels just as bad or worse than 2 years ago.
Right.
So what is the consensus like?
So.
And why?
Right, so again, if I'm a teacher in a classroom, I may not feel these numbers.
Right.
They may be my numbers are the ones that are keeping things elevated because of the mix of kids I happen to have in my class this year or at this moment.
But then there's gotta be 5 other teachers who feel, wow, this is
Right.
fantastic.
Correct.
Are we seeing that?
Correct. So again, PBIS, that systems approach, gives us the system that we look at data on a regular routine basis, and it tells us how to look at the data and what data we need to. And now that's gonna be specific to each of our buildings, right? And so when we take that data as a team and we look at it and break it down, say, okay, where do our tier 1 lessons need to be? Based on our data, based on our schools, who's getting in trouble, where is it happening, when is it happening? And then what do we need to address that tier 1, school-wide? And then we can look more granular as we get to tier 2 and tier 3, as those groups of kids get smaller. What interventions then do we need to put in place that are specific to these groups? So I think, Greg, to answer your question is, it's all working together as a system so that we can better respond to what the data tells us is happening in our schools. And that may look different at Baldwin than it does at the elementaries, than it does at the high school or at Riley.
Can this data be shaped or influenced by 1 or 2 really horrible kids who have moved on to the 10th grade or the 9th grade? Is that possible?
Yeah, there's influences on that, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's within the data itself. And that's when you have a student who has greater need and is at a tier 3, where you're having a more intensive response for those students to help support them in learning how to behave.
Okay, so you're talking to me, Josh is shaking his nodding like this. What?
So just a simple example would be, if, because we're having these routine meetings and we're always talking about the data and what's happening, looking over referrals, if we noticed that there was an uptick with arguments or physical altercations on the football field at the playground, we would up the supervision, we would talk to the students, teachers could talk to them during their morning meeting, various ways of attacking it, so that we can notice the trend, make sure that we're monitoring in order to prevent. Be putting adults in place to respond as to your point about students who can skew the data. We are also having through these routine conversations discussions about, oh, we're seeing a big uptick here. Oh, this was so and so. He's had 5 incidents in the last 2 weeks. So are we really having a problem with that behavior, or is it localized to one student who's been having some trouble in that area? So we don't just look at the number, we look at the meaning behind it. Oh, this was just one student who accounted for all of these. So we wouldn't say that the building's having an issue. The student is certainly having an issue, and to Clint's point, he might be being supported by a tier 3 behavior plan. So we wouldn't respond to that with having a discussion with our teachers, hey, we need to increase monitoring at the fields here, because it was one student.
Okay, so Clint, you've got some kids who you're, let's say, just for want of another term, you're happy to see go. Does Delia know who those kids are, and is she prepared to deal with them?
Right, those are conversations that happen between buildings as kids matriculate up. Right, and so those behavior plans travel with students, and those conversations are then had with our team. And part of our team are our school guidance counselors, social workers, those types of things. So those groups then are connected and talk then, just as we talk with our ELA department as they're talking K-12, right? As we go vertically up, we also have then these conversations about students who are also traveling.
Okay, thank you.
Do you ever have it where this kid's just having incidents in one building, say at your building, and the decision's made to shift them over to Riley, or?
So I can answer that. We have had students that are a better fit based on the student population that they're mixing with, but traditionally, students also find a niche in another building of the same peer group.
That's kind of where I was going, but I kind of feel like.
The honeymoon period lasts for a little bit, but but sometimes it's, those are tough decisions.
For sure, because Matt's not gonna love, taking faith in yours or vice versa, you know that's what happens.
Well, I would say those instances are very rare, and that isn't the impetus of a kid moving school. There's a bunch of contributing factors in there, and that might be one, but it's certainly not the reason to, if that makes sense. It's like taking a kid out of a student's class or a teacher's class because there's a personality conflict. We don't just jump on that right away. Like, there's other pieces and parts that we want to put in place to make those things work versus just change the schedule.
Just a consideration of time, do you mind if we moved into elementary?
No, that's fine. The next slide is just TFI. That you asked about goals, like what does that look like? These were just some goals that through our data that the different schools were focusing on for partly this year and then looking forward into next year.
Josh, at the elementary level, when we're placing kids in the classrooms, and maybe it's at some level that might be, probably wouldn't be above you, but do we, if we know we've got a kid who needs some help in behavior, and we know we've got a teacher who can handle that kind of kid, do we sometimes make decisions on what class they're gonna be in based on that?
Yes, they spend a lot of time with class decisions.
Okay.
Not just with the staff, with
Sure,
leadership.
right.
There's many contributing factors.
Okay.
Yeah, this is us. So we're gonna kind of talk about the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, what it looks like at an elementary level. And then after this, we kind of go into the 5-6 building and then kind of what it looks like at Jamestown Lower. It is very hard to get out of the habit of labeling a student as a tier 1, a tier 2, a tier 3 student. So how, in honor of March Madness, like tier 1 would be a gym full of kids learning how to play basketball. Like, I can help them do this. And then tier 2 would be like, this small group of kids don't really know how to dribble. So why don't you come work with me and we'll work on dribbling. Tier 3, not my expertise, shooting. I can't help this student, this athlete shoot better. So I'm gonna try to find someone who specializes in that. And that person can then help that one individual student get better or more proficient at that skill. So when you think of it that way, like tier 1 is what everyone gets. All the kids in the building get. They get scorecards, they get acknowledgments, they get those things. Tier 2 would be those students that maybe need a little extra reminder, or maybe a lesson in a smaller group. And it could be as simple as looking at our recess data. Oh, there's a spike in behaviors. All right, who are the frequent flyers? All right, let's pull them in. We're in groups, learning about how do we be kind outside in the playground, what does respect look like out there, with the goal of getting those students out of that group and then kind of showing us, you can do this on your own. And so those groups would kind of change based on where we see the need. Tier 3 students would be, right, they're not really responding to the Tier 1, not responding to that Tier 2. So what type of supports can we offer at Tier 3 that may be individualized or specific to that student's behavior? So that we can support them so they can be at school, continue learning, and then just kind of feel that success.
All right, so PBIS at the 5-6 building, for tier 1, all of our students, we have SOAR cards, so that's how we are acknowledging positive behaviors that we're seeing from our students. Our teachers are handing them out. We talk a lot about our expectations, so part of that tier 1 is having consistent language and consistent expectations. So any student in the cafeteria, they should know what our expectations are in the cafeteria. Same thing as outside of the playground. And then in the classroom, they also have common expectations for in the classroom. So teachers are using the same language. We just actually had our PBIS meeting today, and one of them was 70% of our students, of those 70%, 67% need to know all of our SOAR rules and what those stand for, and we were 100% know 75% or more of our rules or expectations that we have. So that's something that we talked about. We also do a SOAR card drawing. So we talked about this at our PBIS meeting today as well, that really it's the acknowledgement of the behavior. That is what's truly impactful. A lot of times we're doing these SOAR drawings or giving them awards for soaring, but it's really that immediate, in the moment acknowledgement of the behavior and that positive behavior. That's what's impactful, and that's what's going to continue, that one-on-one conversation with the teacher or the staff member that is catching them doing the right thing. So kids do enjoy winning prizes at our SOAR drawings, but really that one-on-one conversation is most important. We do have school-wide celebrations too, when they reach certain levels, because they drop their tickets into this big bucket, and it's like a tower, and so every fourth of the bucket, we try to do some type of school-wide celebration. We give our students some ownership in that. They can pick what they would like our school-wide celebrations to be, and they vote on it. And then we do have tier 1, 2 with our SOAR videos and classroom lessons. We're updating those. We have a couple of our elective classes where the kids are actually, now that we've been a building, this is our 2nd year. We've had our drama class. They've been making videos for all of the SOAR lessons, like in our building, so we're not having to watch SOAR videos in other buildings, because that maybe doesn't pertain to us. So giving that ownership back to the kids so they feel like they're a part of it is super important to us as well. Part of our tier 1 also, we have what are called responsible thinking sessions. So if a student maybe isn't following those expectations, they've been given a reminder, and then the teacher might give them, they ask the WH questions, what are you supposed to be doing right now? Can I help you get back on track? And then they're still not, after having that quick dialogue, we have what we call just a quiet 5 with our, we have a para or a PBIS specialist. They will actually come and they'll take the student and they do a conversation and a dialogue with them, like what is truly happening that we can help support you with. And so they have that responsible thinking session, and then they're able to go back to class, hopefully that same day within hopefully 15, 20 minutes, but sometimes based on the time, they might not go back to that class until the next day if they're on the secondary schedule. And then we have community circles. That is actually our building goal this year, because we really wanted to focus on, we have the kids for 2 years. It's a really short amount of time, and they're having a big transition from elementary, coming into a brand new building and meeting a bunch of new people. So really the purpose of community circles is to build those relationships and get them to be able to trust other people and to build like a safe community for them. And it has been really powerful this year. our fifth grade teachers, they are doing it almost daily with their classes, and our kids talk about them, a lot. And then our sixth grade teachers, it's that debate between academics and I'm doing this, but the big bang for their buck is building those relationships, so they have the kids longer, and they'll get more time on the end with the academics if they're building those trusting relationships from the get-go. So that would be our tier 1. And then at tier 2, this is 7.5% of our student population, which is about 48 students in our building. They have been participating in some type of tier 2 intervention this year. So we have check-in, check-out. That's with our PBIS specialist, and we also have a para that is trained that also can do check-ins with some of our students that need that check-in as well. We do have skills groups. We're calling them behavior academies, sorry. And they are identified based on their behavior referrals through PowerSchool. So we're monitoring each student, and our PBI specialist will pull up behavior referrals, and once a student has like 3 behavior referrals, he's going and communicating with that team of teachers. Our 5th grade students are in a team of 2, our 6th grade students are in a team of 4. He's touching base with those teachers to see, like, do you think a behavior academy is an appropriate next step for this child? And they have a dialogue about it, and then there's communication with the family to talk about what behavior academy maybe is the best fit. So we have a civility academy, there's an organization academy, there's a social skills one. There's a few more, but we're identifying what is the best fit to help that child with whatever behaviors we might be seeing from them. And then we also have coping plans that are something that students can have to help them if they are struggling mostly with like anxiety.
Melanie, when do the parents become involved? At what level? And when in that level? Is it at level 2, tier 2?
Really, I would say tier 1, because with our responsible thinking sessions, any student that goes for a responsible thinking session, teachers are supposed to be making communication to a parent about what happened and that they had to have a responsible thinking session.
What is the communication? Is it an email?
It can, we really push to have a phone conversation, but sometimes just with the nature of it, they might send an email too, so, but.
What kind of response do they get from parents?
For the most part, I feel like parents want to know what's
Yeah.
going on in the classroom, and they want to have that communication, so they do appreciate that
Are they
communication.
coming alongside, or are they maybe saying, my kid doesn't do that kind of stuff?
You do sometimes get some, both, yeah. You'll get both, but I would say more so, I mean, because starting those conversations at the tier 1 level, and then once kids maybe are being recommended for a tier 2 support, we don't want to have that first conversation happen when we're recommending them for a tier 2 intervention. We want that communication to have happened previous to that.
How many of your teachers are comfortable with the communication?
I feel like every teacher is making
Okay.
contact, so that's a part of what they do on a daily basis.
Okay, that's not something that would. Okay.
It's similar to academics
Yeah.
too, because we're contacting when they're struggling with an academic area, and if we wanna bring them to our child study team to find the correct academic intervention, we're having those conversations, just the same as with behavior.
A little bit earlier, I asked the question, going from one tier to the other, do we have standard, procedures for each school, so that one school isn't gonna be different than another? But I look at these two right here that you presented to us, and you're at 7.5% tier 2. Pete, you're at 17%. Are you just more demanding of what the kids' behavior should be like, or is it just out of control because of you?
I think it's because we have recess.
And I'm saying that tongue in cheek,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I don't know, can I interrupt just a second on that one, because we're only in our 2nd year as a building, and so we spent a lot of time last year, we had to start at the groundwork of building tier 1, and then we were trying to implement some tier 2 and getting some interventions in place. And so I think next year, I think our number, I don't know what, I can't predict what our 4th grade coming into 5th
Sure.
grade is gonna look like, but I would say that number probably will go up just because our systems will be even better running and in place, cause we are really we just really started implementing a lot of those tier 2.
So it's not a bad thing if it goes up, it means
No.
you have more resources.
We just have more resources and a system that is growing, yeah.
Melanie, what's your overall end at Georgetown? How many students are there? Because at Jamestown, we're looking at 297. What's your?
We're at as of today, it's 625.
I will say, I know you're not done yet, but when I first looked at the presentation, I kind of thought, boy, seems to be just joining, it's coming from all, but every question I've asked you so far, all of you have had excellent responses, so you know your stuff. And I feel much more confident after hearing from you rather than looking at some of this stuff, which I said to myself, well, how does this lead to this? So I want to commend you for that, because any question that anyone in the group's had, you've had very good responses. I'm confident you know your stuff. Or at least we're just asking all the right questions.
And I just have 2 or 3 left, so I would say thank you just to the whole team that is here, just with the mental health services. That has been a huge help to our students, and it was definitely very needed. So that's one of the tier 3 interventions that we can provide to some of our students. And in addition to behavior plans, and then just more intensive individualized interventions. So we do have, like, you'll see 3.5%. Some of those students are also in tier 2. So we do have some students that are in a behavior academy, but they are also seeing our mental health therapist. So I just want to note that that's not a separate set of students.
All right, so you'll notice 297. A lot of the same things as far as supports with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And at the bottom, how we kind of transition from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3. So all of our students receive tier 1. It is a different demographic of students, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. So we're going from little humans who are the center of the universe to little humans that are, oh, I'm part of this universe and I can kind of help out too. So that's where maybe some of that 17% jumps up a little bit, saying like, oh, you can share with your friends on the playground at lunch. You don't have to, like, this is my food. But some of the things under tier 1 are more based on the age of our students. And it is fun to kind of see at the beginning of the year handing the scorecards out, and students are like, well, I did this, can I have one? No, like, you know how to do that. We want to see you do something above and beyond that. So that's kind of fun to see, like, that shift and that transition. 17% of our student population in tier 2, and sometimes we'll look as a PBIS team and say, hey, we're seeing an uptick in behavior on the playground, or it's a little loud in the hallways. So we'll just maybe pull some second grade groups together, start focusing on that, and see what kind of impact that has on playground or the area that we're seeing kind of an uptick. So that's why that number's a little higher too. And then for the tier 3, I did like double check. So 0.7% of our student body receives a tier 3 intervention. And then going through them, we try to make sure that we're always including all parties. So parent involvement, teacher involvement, our PBIS specialists will kind of monitor those referrals. We'll go to the classroom teacher and say, hey, I've noticed this. Do you think student X would benefit from this type of group? Sometimes the teacher's like, yes, or it's like, no, I think I have a handle on it. And just kind of monitor that and then circle back. But always there to support the teachers however we can.
All right. So what information do we have to support our current practices? I'll kind of skip through the first part. That's a little bit redundant. That's been covered, that we have students in tier 2 accessing different services. 98% of the students at Bauer are progressing as identified by reduction in referrals, teacher perception data, and check-in, check-out score sheets. So where we're tracking specific behaviors. And then on the next slide, continuing that, 38% of the students in tier 2 have exited tier 2, and that's based on over an 80% score over the course of roughly 4 to 6 weeks. There's also, individual judgment that we put on that. We don't just strictly look at a number. Our TFI data, so going through the building and looking at benchmarks of quality within our system. Adults in the building, 100% of them know the acronym, the SOAR acronym. Students who know the acronym, 100%. Students within the last 2 months who have been acknowledged with our building SOAR tickets, 100% of them. Each week I hold a building-wide provide SOAR drawings, so one student from every classroom is announced over the PA system, and they come down to get a certificate, they get to pick a prize from a menu. For example, they like to have lunch with a friend, so we have some tables around the commons area, they can bring a friend and have lunch in a separate location with them. Part of the blessing of PBIS is it's part of our culture. Something that I'm big on is shared leadership. You know, if everything just comes down to Josh Mearsma, the building isn't gonna run very well. Everybody has to chip in and take ownership of our building. So the PBIS system is alive and well with the adults in the building as well. We recently did kind of like a play on the March Madness thing. We did a March bracket challenge with our staff, hitting some quality pieces. So we did, for example, in 1 week, how many, we call them Bauer Powers, could you give to your colleagues? So what's something that you could type positive feedback for a friend? And it wasn't, you know, we wanted to be authentic, not just, you know, to hit a number. But we hit over 400 in that week. It was awesome. And some of the stuff that I had the privilege to read is just, it's really special. Something that I would share about just being a part of a PBIS system, and this is from John Gordon, who we invited here, is you know, being positive won't guarantee that you'll succeed, but being negative will guarantee that you won't. I think always reminding ourselves that we can continue to be living beyond a 5-to-1 ratio. We can always praise kids. We can find things even in the most difficult students to praise. Checking ourselves as adults about the blessings that we have, you know, the privileges that we have to work with students and make an impact. Days get long, you know, Clint mentions this time of year can be challenging, but if we kind of return to the positive, it's very helpful.
Josh, do you have a process to speak with, like, Pete and Mark and John, and, you know, I mean, where you're saying, hey, this has happened in my, I've tried this in my school, maybe you might wanna try that, or is it more generic than that?
So Amy leads our principal meetings, and we have principal mentors, support partners. So we text each other.
Okay.
If we ever had an agenda item that we wanted to discuss with the group, Amy lets us,
Sure.
you know, drop that in the agenda.
Sure.
We talked about that with the organization, about the number of times our building principals are being pulled in many directions, but that is one of the priority of them working together and not working in silos, and it's something we've been working on for years.
I was going to kind of go into the mental health therapy later, but, just being mindful of time, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on that topic, or that could be for another day. But just to echo your comment, Greg, I am very appreciative of our administrative team, because, nobody's asking, like, why we have to do this. I think they're all highly invested, and they are all very knowledgeable of, like, the why behind it. So their leadership has been the reason why, we've continued to make gains in this area. Do you have any other questions for this group?
Just overall, number one, great presentations. Obviously, this is where you're living and you're putting a lot of effort into it and seeing it. You know, my other comment just went out the door. I'll think of it. Great.
Just well thought out, really well thought out, well planned, well engaged, well prepared for. Obviously, it's a journey. You don't just move from here to here and, you know, here. And it's a journey we're on. So just really well done. Really well done. Really, just nice work. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you. I'd love to, have these on an annual basis, because again, we often hear it when it's bad. And so it's nice to have the data that says, hey, there's things we're working on, because we don't have this stuff, and I'm just like, oh, maybe it is really bad, it's getting worse. This is really helpful. So
Good.
thank you all.
Well, thank you to this committee, and this isn't usually a night that they're, on, so they're gonna head out, but thank you very much for being
I thought
here.
you're trying to get us out early, Mandy. It's them. Oh, we're here all night. We're here. No, it's time in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Nice job.
Thanks, Josh.
I already have that. It's a problem.
Next up, we have the filter first program, bid recommendation. it over to Pat, go through the bid recommendations. You'll see a plethora of bids that came in, regarding the filter first.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Banajek. Before you, I'll just go into a little bit about what the Filter First program is. We're gonna go through the bids. The program is intended to eliminate to a level of zero the possibility that students in a school would consume water with lead in it. It's a lot to go. We have municipalities and schools in our state that have had terrible problems with that, and this is a result of that. The state had additional funds through COVID at a certain point, and they set funds aside for this initiative. Under the leadership of Lee Arntz, our Director of Buildings and Grounds, it's an incredibly detailed survey he's taken through our buildings. It's this thick packet. Lee's walked through all the buildings to assure that we're in compliance, but Lee and his staff actually had to inventory every fixture, every spot where you could drink, literally consume water. So all the spigots, all the faucets, all the classroom sinks, everything there's nothing that's exempt. So when we're through this process, which is a state, it's not a will you, it's a demand by the state, that we will comply. What has the end result of that will be drinking fountains, or any potential source of drinking water, which is a faucet, drinking fountain, bottle filler, all the things, has to be labeled with, if that potential source of drinking water isn't filtered, it has to say non-filtered drinking water.
So like
Everything. Yes, it has to have a label on it. So that's the end result. And Lee took the inventory. We're gonna go through all the classrooms. We're gonna go through all the buildings, all the drinking. A lot of our current drinking fountains don't have lead filters on them. When we're through this process, we'll have to annually post data. We'll have to post our results of what we found. It's not gonna be a one and done effort. If we find that a filter or a source of drinking water isn't 100% compliance, we have to shut it down immediately. So pretty stringent program. Through all that, we have a vendor who's worked with the school for years, very successfully, a mechanical company. We were very hopeful they would bid the project. Sometimes it was a lot of work. The amount of work these people put into just doing the bid, putting the bid together, was prohibitive of other vendors putting a bid together. They walked through and essentially duplicated the work, because if I were you, I'd be asking, why just one bid on a $400,000 job? They essentially had to duplicate the work of our staff in that same inventory to know what they were bidding. So, this is all the schools, every potential source of water. We don't have to do it in buildings where we don't have students. We probably will, when we're done with this core bit of work. But we have one bid. We're really happy with this bidder. They do great work for us on projects. we have other contractors who do great work. They're very invested in Hudsonville and they really want to get this job, that's all I can say. So our recommendation is to, will be after your consideration at next month's meeting to award bid DHE Plumbing Mechanical for $402,600.
So a bunch of questions. Just as much related to the actual grant. So did I hear you say that every school has to do this? Or every school that was gonna apply for the grant?
Every school where, so every place a kid could get a drink.
So
So
any
in the
school
state
in
of
the whole
Michigan.
state, they're supposed to be doing this? Okay. And then what about, I mean, like Ottawa County in the city produces a water report on an annual basis. Is some of this related to the fact that some of our schools don't have city water and sewer?
They have to be treated the same.
Okay.
So we have a school at the well. And we do regular testing with the wells, as does every school in the state is required to do that, same testing if they have a well. But, yeah.
You think about city water and sewer, you think, okay, if that doesn't pass and you have to add a filtration system, it just seems.
Everybody with municipal water.
Yep.
They test all the time. And they may have stepped it up, but I've noticed since I've been in Hudsonville area, all the municipalities test. And they come here to the endpoint test and do tests as well. But, this would be yet another measure of protection for something that would happen because things happen that are out of their control.
Right.
People can backfeed a water line with something like a solvent and there's nothing they can do about that. And this gives us that added measure of protection.
It's not so much the source of the water as it's going through the pipes, right? Or,
Well, the pipes are stable
yeah,
until they're not.
right,
Yeah, and
right.
that's the problem.
Right.
is They test and test and test, and, this just gives us, it's like I don't know, one more measure to protect if something like that ever did happen. Because our levels are so low now, they're undetectable, but that's how it is now, with the system being stable and with no
So Pat,
solvent introduced.
what's the scope of work? I mean, we're just spending $400,000 on like signs on every faucet.
No, like for example.
We gotta put filters on it, and how much is it gonna be like ongoing?
So elementary class, it's gonna be cost. Yeah, so elementary, that's unfunded mandate, that part. They thought they would be able to pay for the whole project upfront, and our total budget that we submitted for was pretty close. We did a great job estimating the budget. Was $408,408. The bid's 402,600. We're funded at $241,000 for this work.
So we're making up the other.
Yes.
And any idea on an ongoing basis, how much we're gonna have to pay annually?
The amount, I would say for the amount of labor, it'll be I don't know how we're gonna do it for less than 10 hours a week.
The testing will from time to time.
Yeah.
The signs, once they're up, they're up.
Yeah.
Filters will last for several years before they have to be replaced, so for the first few years it will look different, but the testing, and who knows what the state does. Traditionally, they do all these things and they ask you to do them, and they're not gonna step in and fund them because
Yeah,
somebody had a great idea and therefore, let's have the schools fix everything.
So the bid is, so we're being asked to approve $402K, but of that amount, the $241 is being covered by grants.
Yes.
This will be in this year's budget.
Yes. We will be able to get, we didn't think they would be able to get on it as quickly as they have been able to. And it's just how companies' schedules switch, but I think we'll get most of it done in this year's budget. There'll be some that'll lag into, July and August, but most of it will be out of this year's budget.
The more we can pull out of the grant this year, the better.
Don't leave us many options.
Well said. Well said. All right.
Remember that when you go vote.
Yeah, and I just think about all these other schools and the schools where it happened, and you think, if this is the best they're doing, if other schools are experiencing that, the cost is so much more, and I just, my heart breaks for those people who've had to already deal with it, and now still aren't going to be getting probably what's adequate for what's required.
We have a very fortunate situation with past relationships, and this vendor's been, we've been talking to them for a year and a half about this. They've been giving us their feedback on what we see in other clients, other schools, and not everybody in the state has the relationships and vendor, I mean, there are rural schools that, it's gonna be tough.
Again, that's a bigger social question, but it still relates to the schools and all students in the state of Michigan. So, but thank you for your work and Lee's work and the team's work.
Fabulous leading this. Thank you.
Any, video display bid recommendation?
Thank you. So as we wind down our 2019 bond proposal, there are several projects that we still are undertaking that we did not know if funds would be available to get them done. This is one of them, is to put a video display at our stadium. We've talked about this with potentially when we didn't think we'd have money to do this, to look at vendors that can help pay for this. We talked about this maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago. But as the bond's starting to wind down, there's been some ups and downs with the bidding process, as you've seen as a board. And so we have the funds available out of our current bond issue to finish, this is one of them. The high school storage unit that was approved by the board, that was another project that could be done because there was funds available. A lot of the rest of the funds will come with a lot of the technology needs that we might try to do to get ahead of the next bond issue. I'd like to present a opportunity to do this at our stadium. If you recall, if you've been to the stadium, you may recall that on the south side of the stadium, you're looking, you can barely see it here, but this right here is our current scoreboard. I don't know if you see my mouse, kind of, over here. This is our current scoreboard. It is a digital display produced by Daktronics. That is our system at the field. We have a Daktronics board on both sides. You have it on this side, as well as the one that's even smaller is the one right here. You see my mouse, it's over to the right. If you're walking down the path, that just has score and time. They're both run by Daktronics, which is what our complete system is there. So when we met, we did meet with the finance committee and have this conversation, what this would look like, the scope. I put the bid in the board packet so you can see what the bid would look like. The challenge is if we put a board on this stadium, you'd have to use Daktronics, otherwise you'd have to replace both boards. So the idea is to potentially go out and get another bid if needed, but we do have a sole source letter that says this is what we do. So Pat and I will get that finalized before the next board meeting. Wanted to see what questions the board may have. There's a rendering. I don't know if I made that for everybody. I think it is.
Is everyone happy with Daktronics as far as?
So that's a great question. I did spend some time talking about, so we have Electromatic as our current marquee signs at our building level. I would say there's been some challenges with Electromatic. We've talked about Watchfire is another product that is out there. We've talked to other schools that have either one, and Daktronics does seem to be a little bit better supported now in the area as more and more schools have them. Rockford, West Ottawa, Kentwood, you see some of those schools that have them. We are, all schools now in the OK Red do have video displays at their football field with the exception of Grand Haven. I know some of you have been to other school districts and you've seen them, and it's not just a football display, it's a It's for track and field. We host the Division IV state championships. This is not something that would be ready for that, but that would be a whole other level of, whether it be advertisement or, production of student performances. The band have competitions there, track and field. We're looking at, women's field hockey has some games there. So just others than just, it's not just used Friday nights, Friday nights. Clearly, other schools also rent out our facilities and use that. You have schools like, I'll say, when they rent out different schools from Jenison to Hudsonville to Granville, and they come to Hudsonville and it doesn't have what Jenison and Granville offer, it's a little bit different. This board would go on the south end of the field. It's really hard, it's really easy to see on my screen, it's not easy to see up there. But you can see, well, the goalpost is right here, it's straight up and down, so you can't quite see it. But looking at a display back in this area over here, so on the other side of the track.
On the north side?
That's on the north side.
So this would be on the north
Okay.
side of the building,
Okay.
the track, so you get rid of the small
Yep.
the small scoreboard on the far right-hand side. Thank you very much. The scoreboard, so it would go here. Potentially it would either go here, high enough that you can still see behind it, this walking path, or here without getting the long jump hits. This would be removed, this is the other scoreboard. Electricity would have to run out there, so the bid that you have in front of you does not include the installation and the electricity, which is about around anywhere between 75 and 125. So quite frankly, it falls cheaper than the scope of the scoreboard that we looked at a couple years ago because the prices have come down a little bit. They're not gonna fall like TVs did at Costco from when you got your rear projection TVs back in the 80s, but they're definitely the quality and the availability looks a little bit different. It is a good sized board. You can see the dimensions on the bid that you have in front of you. It also includes, if you look at the design that you have in front of you, you'll see a box on top. That box is a speaker system, so it's a whole new sound system that also goes in also. So you're hearing it from the board, which really projects the sound. If you may have gone to, I'll say Rockford, Jenison, Granville, Kentwood, West Ottawa, I mean, it's a similar system with the sound that comes in. That's why a couple different designs you see look a little bit different. We have not shared these designs yet with our athletic department. I want to have the conversation with the board first to say, is this something that we can bring to you in April? If it were the case and the board would vote in favor of this, then it's about a 3-month turnaround for design build, and it would be done hopefully by the end of July.
So you said that the electrical and the installation is on top of this
That's correct.
429.
What you see is sound and board and warranty.
Okay.
So the final bid will come to you. We're still waiting on soil borings and the electrical cost from most likely Parkway, who's done most of our electrical work. It takes a lot of power to run any board. You see the cables at the stadium or the field house, similar conversation. But the one nice thing about Daktronics, going back to your original question, Dawn, was it is a similar board to what we have in our field house. So from a software standpoint, from an understanding of how to do different things, it's consistent with the two boards. It is not the same software used for our display signs, that are marquee signs at our buildings, but it's a whole different need.
Dawn, did something prompt your question about Daktronics?
Yeah, because I know that there's always those follow-up issues with the electronics. And I know at the field house, there were a few issues with a few things that may or may not have been related to who we purchased it from. But, that's probably the thing that gets most frustrating is when you have something this large, and yes, it comes with some warranty, what kind of support do they give you 2 years from now when some squirrel got in and ate up some cord? Those are the kind of things that you want to make sure that the support is there and that they don't just disappear after the initial installation. So that was.
I think going back to that also, I do believe that the number of clients that they had in the area continues to increase dramatically. So the need to have somebody in the area is now here where I don't think it was probably 10 years ago. It's a similar conversation with the Colorado board that you have in most of the pools in the area. You have IST in Colorado. Those boards are tough. You're in a humid environment and it looks different. Colorado is more prominent in a pool. Daktronics has has some boards, Rockford's board, but it breaks more than our board because of the environment of the board. The exterior boards, they see a lot more success, because a lot of schools have them.
And being on the north side, I guess the only thing I'm thinking is, okay, the sun is coming from the south, most of the time it's almost past the bleachers, but as far as the visibility, going from the south to the north.
You won't be able to, it's too bright. It won't.
Okay.
It's a good question. During the day, it'll look just as good as it does.
Okay.
Really cool at night, because some of the design outside of the board is backlit. Conversations about putting Hudsonville on the board versus Eagle Stadium, we'll have to have those conversations to kind of solidify a design to bring to the board. There's mixed. There's a lot of times it's really nice when other people use our facility and it does say Hudsonville
Right.
on the top. And Eagle Stadium.
2 years ago, we were thinking of doing it on the south side, correct?
We've always thought about doing it on the north side.
Oh.
The idea was that we'd have this board as a video board and still keep our large board on the side.
Yeah,
We're not gonna
that's
get value for either board, so if we're gonna rip one down, rip the little one down and keep the other good sized board.
Yeah.
That's great.
So, we were gonna keep the one on the north, or on the south side and wrap the back of it with, sponsors.
Oh,
But the more we can stay away from that, the classier I think the facility looks. And we might get to a point financially, but based on the structure of the bond and the great work Pat and his team have done, we can get to this project too, and probably some tech projects that I know the finance committee talked a little bit about, but that'll come to time too.
We'll be able to do sponsorships on this board just like we do.
So yeah, so it's a little bit different when you do sponsorships on the video board here or at the field house, because those are direct revenues that go back to our athletic department that turn around and support programs and kids. Where the other sponsors we were looking at were permanent, we're just going to fund the board. Since we can finish this up with part of the bond project, then we can utilize that to support operational needs of our athletic department. That's what you're saying, right?
Exactly.
We still wanna keep away from putting things up outside of events. So in the